Right, my clocks all reckon it's 11 a.m, so I guess it's time to actually get started. So welcome to our August workshop of the Virtual Paleoscience Project. I'm Jane Bunting and I get to do the welcome talk today on behalf of the somewhat diffuse coordinating group and the everyone who's involved in the project. So this is our August workshop in which we're hoping to present some results and also develop plans for the future. So some brief housekeeping, the Zoom rules that we're all getting very tired of. If everyone can put themselves on mute unless they're either speaking or have been asked to speak, explain a comment they made or something, because that really reduces the risk of feedback and echoes. And if people can keep their camera off while one person is speaking, so during talks, that helps reduce bandwidth for people with internet issues. We really want to encourage you to use the chat. So if you're not used to Zoom, when you pull up the Zoom information, one of the things you should be able to see is a chat tool. If you can't, use the 3 dots to pull down the extra menu, and in that you'll find a chat tool. And in here you can talk to everyone, and it's great because it lets you chat away in the background while speakers are talking. You can also talk to people privately, but that links to the 4th point, which is that we are recording the session so that we can share the talks and so on with people who aren't able to make it today because they're on leave or they're in charge of children or whatever. And when that's saved in the chat, we can also see any private messages that's sent, and we'll just edit them out, but just so you're aware that you can see anything you say there is seen. So we are recording, and we'll share a version of the talks and so on the website. Another way to contribute to the meeting today is through a feedback form. We'll share that with meeting participants after the 2nd day, but we'll also share it more widely as another way for people to make comments and feedback on how the wider project is going. During the day, we've put in breaks, sort of short breaks about every hour, roughly, and have a half-hour schedule planned in for lunch. As we understand, people will need to step away from the computers. I think we're all getting a bit computer sick and chair sick over this period. But obviously, people need to wander in and out. We completely get that. That's just the nature of meetings at the moment. So housekeeping aside, I'll say something about the Virtual Paleosciences project. The Virtual Paleosciences project is very much a community project by the community for the community. And in this case, the community is anyone who works and teaches in the paleosciences broadly, or who might teach in them one day, or who does outreach in them. So anyone who potentially is going to be communicating about, teaching about the paleosciences, with a focus on the higher education level, at least to start with. And it started with general panics, requests on Twitter, requests on social media for help as people tried to pivot teaching with, in some cases, less than 24 hours notice in March as the university shut down in the face of the pandemic. At the Yorkshire Paleo Group meeting in April, I presented on a project that we've had in Hull for about 10 years, the col-pol project, or eSlide project, which is a set of software and images that replicate the experience of a microscopy practical, let you go all the way through from teaching pollen ID through to counting a class pollen diagram. And at the same time, Simon presented on virtual field trips and on field trip compensation, and in the field trip replacement. And that led to a discussion about how sharing and collating resources in a more systematic way would be beneficial, which led to a group of us meeting again on Twitter, and then, on the internet somewhere, and then to a call for interest and a meeting in May, And from the meeting in May, we organised or called again, people want to join different working groups. And today, we're going to present the first work of those working groups and think about how the project's going to develop further on. So today is kind of the end of the beginning. We have a project, we have a project structure, we've done some things well, we've not done some things, we've done some things badly, and this is the point we're going to move forward from. So ViPs was developed both to address an immediate need, the pivot to blended and online learning in response to COVID, but it was very clear from early on that we also cared a lot about a longer term need, and that's about equity and accessibility to the Palaeosciences for a very wide range of situations where students may not be able to fully partake in field or laboratory situations, or where using a variety of resources and using blended approaches to learning that don't just assume that people attend lectures and then go away and read a pile of papers without structure, can benefit a very wide range of students. And so that longer term reason for working on online materials developed. So our overall goal is to build collections of resources which enable any academic, anyone teaching in the Palaeosciences to pick and choose essentially from a toolkit that will help them teach better and will help their students learn better. And we've always talked about work in the short term. Today we're presenting some of that short term work. And over the course of today and tomorrow, hope to be planning for the medium and long term, and looking forward to having all of you involved. And Simon's also reminded me that when we're building resources, and I'm talking about equity and accessibility, it's not just for people who can't go on fieldwork at all that we need to replace it. It's actually that the field experience can be enhanced a lot by, for example, going on a virtual field trip and practicing some of the skills of taking good field sketches whilst sitting on your backside in a nice comfortable lab, not being blown around by the wind and eaten by a midge. So that a lot of these resources, it's a sliding scale, it's not either or. These are available to enhance or develop teaching. Come on, next page, thank you. So the way we've organised ourselves, or the structure we're working with at the moment, is multifold. We have a coordinating group, which consists of the original people who were discussing it and representatives from each of our working groups. We've come down to 5 working groups, and each of them will present on their work this morning. So there's working group 1 is collation and building a website. Working group 2 considers fieldwork materials. Working group 3 considers data analysis, what they're really calling the sample journey. So from as soon as the core is in the lab, it becomes part of that process, and we might take samples, we might analyze it in different ways to collect the data, or we might bring data back from the field, and we then do things with that data to interpret and reconstruct. And then working group 4 is expert talks. We're essentially thinking here of guest lectures. So short talks by experts, which can be included in your teaching, treated as guest lectures, used as the starting point for a seminar about the work of that person or on that topic, as augmented material, and so on. And then working group 5, which are concerned with pedagogy. So once you've got an online resource, once you've found one, what do you do with it? And then we have a lot of people who are involved, who signed up to a mailing list at the beginning of the project or as the project's gone on. Some of those people volunteered to coordinate and start to pull together the work of the working groups more actively. So each working group has a group of people who've been meeting regularly over the summer and progressing work. And those people have been communicating with people who expressed an interest in that group. At least one representative from each working group is part of the coordinating group, and we also meet every couple of weeks to keep things on track, hopefully, or at least to make sure that every group's talking to each other, because the layers of talking to each other that are necessary are really important. Yes. And Simon's added a comment that it's very much a case of representatives from those working groups, not leaders from those working groups. So we try and keep a very flat structure. Nobody's really in charge. Different people have taken a lead in different areas, but we hand that off as people are away or get busy or so on. So we have this web of connections between the groups, and part of the role of the coordinating group is that's just a place to make sure everybody's talking to each other effectively. And our ordinary, everyone else on the mailing list should be, hopefully, communicating up and down with those groups as they coordinate their activities, with a goal of contributing materials ultimately to the website and the project list in terms of available online resources about the paleosciences, and of course being the users of those links. There's no point making beautiful spreads of information and not actually sharing them and not having them be used. On the pedagogy side, we are also looking for people to join in pedagogy projects, and they'll say more about that in their talk. The scope for people to actually join in with some pedagogic research or investigations in the coming weeks. We've also been lucky enough to secure 3 project interns, 1 at Salford and 2 at Hull. And they will be involved over the next few months in hopefully organising data, in transferring data from the spreadsheet of resources into the website to make a more friendly, student-friendly and usable format. And generally in helping us be more organised and get a more solid handle on everything, because I don't know about anyone else, but this summer really has felt like scrambling out of a shipwreck and trying to work out where you are. And hopefully we can now start getting a little bit more organised. So they're here today, and it's particularly great that we've got student views, both from some students, one of them didn't graduate in our field, so is able to present the sort of views that a first year might experience encountering this material. And the other 2 did graduate in geography and geology areas. Represent more the 3rd year or master's students. So we're hoping to really be able to draw on their expertise as students. A brief mention of intellectual property rights, which are always an issue when dealing with online materials and sharing materials. Most of what we're doing at the moment is collecting links to external sites, and we record their status in the database. But where we link to external sites, it is their problem, not ours, if there's copyright issues, unless we link through a firewall. So unless we download for example, download something from a paid for archive that our university pays for and then share it with other people. When contributors are creating material, we're asking them to work under Creative Commons attribution. And the attribution recommended is the non-commercial share-alike. So attribution non-commercial share-alike license, which means that the creator is always acknowledged. The material can't be used for profit making, but the material can be modified, adapted and built on however the user likes, but should be shared under the same terms. So they should also make it available to other people. We require that if people submit material to the ViPs project, so that it's hosted by ViPs as well as linked to by ViPs, we need that the creators use and understand Creative Commons material. And we've also already declared a clear takedown policy. So if anyone says there's a problem with material, we've got a policy in place to deal with it. And we think that that should cover everything. One issue that has come up is that materials, as opposed to performances. So the difference between a lecture you give, which is a performance, and a document you write, which is considered an object, a material object. Materials created in the course of employment for many universities are considered to be partly under the rights of the employer. Now, when we're Creative Commons and there's no money involved, it's very rare that employers are interested, but this is something that is going to come up. So that's the boring stuff of IP, but this has actually taken a chunk of time this summer because we're very concerned to make sure that we protect everyone's rights as creators, as contributors, and as users of materials. So if you ask more about that, Simon and I have mostly been consulting with our universities, and Nikki at White House has been consulting with our universities and have some ideas. So that information's there and we leave it on the website. So to the more interesting stuff of what we're actually doing today. This workshop was called for 3 reasons. One is it gave us a great deadline for what we've been doing over the summer. We knew where we were working towards. And it's the start of us making resources much more widely available to the community. It's a chance for us to talk about what's happening in the next 3 or 4 months. So what's happening by Christmas, and encourage people to be more involved, or hopefully people have more ideas how they can be more involved with that. And also maybe let people plan a bit. If you know something's coming next trimester, that may be useful. And planning for the longer term, so planning for next year and beyond. And today we're organising that with the morning with talks from the individual working groups. And we'll take a break around 12 for 10-15 minutes for refreshing teacups and visiting bathrooms and so on. And then we'll have half an hour for lunch. And then we have a discussion session where we're going to discuss in smaller groups first, thinking about missing areas and gaps and responses to this morning, and then come back into plenary. And we've scheduled ourselves a gap at 2:45, and we'll finish by 4 or earlier if we feel the conversation is finished. Because tomorrow we're going to be thinking about forward planning. So we'll begin by pulling together the threads from today. So an introduction to the ideas that came out of the afternoon's discussion and of the things that the coordinating group and the working groups have been discussing in the summer in terms of things we think are needed. We'll then have 4 workshops, and the idea is that people can attend all of them or none of them, or one and just feedback through the feedback form, or whatever interests you. And those workshops focus on different areas of work. One is the medium-term work of developing virtual field trips. 2 is thinking about smaller resources. So that might be a 15-minute video or a document to download. Then pedagogic projects, so things related to how to use these materials in teaching, and also to investigate how this huge change in our practice is being received and how to do it better. And then finally, a workshop thinking about the future of our project, what we've done well this summer, what hasn't, how we might want to structure it in the future. For example, we were talking this morning about how a formal monthly newsletter and someone who takes responsibility for that might help us communicate with the wider community much better. And we'll hear more about those in each of the talks from the working groups. So what we're going to do now is that we will move on to talks from each of the working groups. And we'd like to remind you that any questions you want to put into the chat, we'll collect them up. Someone will monitor it and either pass the questions to the speaker if we're keeping to schedule. If not, we'll pick them up later on. So were there any, I didn't see any questions specifically for me, but were there any, Simon? I think you're in it. No? Great, thank you. So in that case, I will stop sharing my screen. And attempt to find my list. So I'm going to now hand over to Kim Davies, who's speaking on behalf of Working Group 1 to talk about the website and the collation of materials. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Jane. I'll just get my screen ready. Morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing all right. As Jane said, I'm going to just talk a little bit about what Working Group 1 have been doing all together. Hopefully everyone can see that. I can't now see my chat function. I think I'm supposed to be in charge of monitoring it. But Jane, if you could do it whilst I'm doing the talking bit, that would be fab.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. And as Jane said, I think one of the first things to point out that it's very much been a group effort on this front, and that's something that's been really nice that's come out of this. Is kind of the community feel that we've developed together. And I am presenting, but I'm very much not, you know, as I say, not the lead on this. This has been a group effort. So we are just going to talk briefly about the progress and outputs, and hopefully share the exciting news of what resources will be available very, very shortly. Logos are a work in progress. Please, any comments on anybody's thoughts on the logos would be very much appreciated. So there's two sections for where we're going to update today. That's hopefully this will feed through. So what have we done so far? And the two sections where we've been working on most intensely have been the collation of the resources that are already available out there. So within the wider working group 1 and the working group sort of smaller committee, we've been putting together all the resources that have been sent across to us and searching those out. And then the website development, as Jane mentioned, how we're actually going to feed back these resources to the wider community, and the two main ways in which we're doing that. So that's what I'll talk about today. So it's not going to be a particularly long talk for you, but I think it'll be more about introducing you to what's here, maybe what's not, and that's something to talk about later on in the discussion sessions. And then where next and where we'll be moving to over the next few months. So there's a couple of screenshots here of the sorts of different resources we've been pulling together, and actually so far over the summer we have managed to collate nearly 300 resources, and these are still coming in slightly less frequently, but you know, people are still contributing, and I know that there's plenty of people out there that possibly haven't added their resources to this list. So as a pitch, can I suggest, if you do have materials you think they'd be beneficial to the wider community, please do send those in to anyone on working group 1, or you know, in the wider VIPs group, because they're really handy, and lots of different and lots of variety of material is really beneficial. So one thing that Jane mentioned there as well that we've been doing as part of this, Ahmed, who's one of our interns, has been kindly going through all the resources, and as a non-geographer or environmental scientist, I'm sure he probably found it very intriguing as to the sorts of things we look at, but he's gone through and checked that all the links work, that they go to where they need to, that there's information and the keywords kind of fit to what the resources are, and that they've been verified in some form with an IP license, and I'll sort of talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But basically where we have the intellectual property licenses, they're assigned, so those of you who use the spreadsheet when you get it can actually assign those licenses in when you use those materials further on. So part of working group 1 was to come up with a kind of categorization system of how we actually work this spreadsheet, and this is still ongoing, and we're obviously welcome to any comments from the wider community as to whether or not you think that it's working or not working, and feedback is always welcomed. But what we've done is we sort of tried to set it up so that we've allowed filtering by keywords and sort of resource type. So the idea would be is that you can actually filter by, I want a video of chironomids, as you see here, so that it should then take you to a procedure video for a fossil chironomid analysis. But perhaps that resource doesn't exist as well, so that will also tell you that there is a gap in the resource there if you're looking for that sort of thing. So we've got lots of different resources, and just to show you, I'm not going to go through all of the spreadsheet because, as I say, there's nearly 300 resources. So as a screen grab of the sorts of things that we have, what we've done is we've got it as a setup as a Google Sheet at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit about what the output aim will be for the wider community at the end. But we've sort of got it by time frame. So we have a rough idea of when the resource relates to. So obviously this doesn't always work if it's longer than these time periods or covers more than one. So you know, these, again, it's the same with all the sort of categorizations. Some things don't fit perfectly, so that's always an issue. We then categorized it by the sector. So where exactly does that fit? So is it a field resource? Is it talking about proxies, microscopes, how to, you know, is it fun, sort of a fun resource that's not necessarily as fully educational, but it's just really interesting and fun to watch. We've then split that up into sort of the activity that might be going on in that sector. So if it is in the field, is it coring? Is it somebody talking about stratigraphy? Is it samples? data collection, these sorts of things. So we've tried to break this down as much as possible in terms of the sector and the activity to make the searching process easier for everybody. And then the kind of key environmental section. So we were wondering whether to best up by proxy or by a specific type. And what we've sort of done here, I think you can see we've got kind of the environment as a space. So is it from a lake, a bog, ice core, something like that. But then we've got another 3 variables in there that you can kind of dive down further. So for example, if you look at the sort of middle of the table here, we've got, it's a lake, but it talks about diatoms, pollen and tephra. So because it's kind of lake coring, so it relates to a lot of different proxies. So obviously we can split that up in lots of different ways. So it's not perfect at the moment in terms of actually trying to assign everything, because it's quite difficult with some of the resources, but we have got to grips with actually where these fit, and we can start to see where the resources are well populated and where perhaps fields are missing. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Not to labour too much over the spreadsheet, but just to sort of, again, show you the other sections where we've got those variables talked about here. So these are some of the sorts of proxies and different dating techniques and things that we've got resources on. So you can see we do have a really nice wide variety. But at the moment, we haven't got a categorization of how many resources are available for each one. So that's something that I think we need to work on and try to coordinate, is actually what we have in terms of quantitative numbers. And then also the resource type. So we have lots of different resource types, which is great. But as you can probably see from some of these outputs, we have quite a lot of, for example, movies from YouTube, which is really great for us in terms of our not needing to host material, but perhaps we might be sort of resource type heavy in some areas, and other areas we're lacking. So that's another area we need to look through and sort of actually work out where those gaps lie. So what are we missing on? And I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of, say, for example, images on the last slide. So the next section, so that's, again, I'll come back to the spreadsheet as to how you can get hold of that and what we plan to do with that in a minute. But the next section, just to run you briefly over what we've been doing as well, is thinking about the website and how we're actually going to show these resources to the wider community. So under development at the moment there is a section of the website which I don't think anyone can see unless they've got a password, but we may also be wrong on that front. But the idea will be is that we can try to categorize these resources on the website. As you can see, there's sort of the categories here and ways in which you can actually study the paleo environment, so other categories there, and people can click on those links and go through and actually find some resources. So the idea with this is sort of as a second phase on from the spreadsheet. Obviously the spreadsheet gives you lots of nice resources. There is some additional information where it's possible and available. We are hoping we have how you can actually use that resource if that's needed. So if it's a how-to sheet, there will be a little bit of information with that, or how you might be able to adapt that into a teaching environment. But obviously if people are just dropping resources, it's less, we have less control as to how we can talk about the descriptions that go with that resource. But what we're aiming to do with some of the website is take that a little bit further than just having a spreadsheet with lots of those different resources, but actually make it a space where there is a chunk of introductory text, there is a wider context around that resource actually as to what use it is. And hopefully the website becomes a place where you can direct students directly to, and actually they can learn a bit about those proxies or those analysis within its wider context. And we're hoping to use those categories from the spreadsheet. As I said, that's where we started as a base. This is where we thought was the easiest way to sort of develop that from. But again, comments are always welcome. All right. And this is something that Jane talked about with the student interns. We're hoping that they will be able to sort of help on this and actually either test the resources to see what level that they fit at. So is it something that would be applicable to the general public or a beginner? Perhaps it's more aimed at a third year student, and they can review and actually help us understand where we have gaps. So the idea will be is that the website will be built on a sort of a mini paleo-environmental sort of Wikipedia type page, if you like. And the notion behind that as well is the sort of same way as in Wikipedia, you can kind of go down a rabbit hole and not come out by clicking through lots of different links. But actually we can build a web here. So what the idea with the website, we're thinking is rather than it being a sort of flat, you click through and you end up at a final destination, it's actually more of a sort of web or a full circle where you can click through different resources but end back where you began, and you can go through the different sections but come back to the starting point. So this is an example here of one of the pages that's there. So, you know, you can start with working out how to use a microscope. The website will have both internal and external links. So at the moment, the red links will take you away from the VIP page to an external site. So for something like this, where you can actually then go and read up how to use a microscope there. So once people have actually worked out how you can use the microscope, they can then have a look at what sort of properties you might be able to record under the microscope. And at the moment, Jane's been developing this, very kindly spending lots of time on this. So as you might expect, the pollen section was where she started. So we have the links here, for example, with an example of, okay, so we can look at pollen grains and spores under the microscope. So this will take you to an internal page which starts to talk about pollen analysis and what you can do there. And again, there'll be resources there available externally and internally. And the nice thing would be is that further down this page, on this pollen analysis page, there's, you know, how do you identify pollen grains? And in there, there's, you know, a click back to the light microscope, so you can then get transferred back to the start of the loop, if you like. So it's not just a kind of frustrating, oh, well, how do I've forgotten what I need to do in the microscope section. You can actually just go back to that, which is a really nice way of looping around, I think. So that's under development, and that's going to be a little bit longer in the pipeline to come forward, but I think it's a really exciting way of actually presenting these resources. So not to take up too much of my time, as I said, it's only sort of 10-minute or 5-minute slot. Just to summarize, you know, all of these exciting things we've developed, but at the moment, these resources are within the Working Group 1 community and not in the wider paleoscience group. So what's next, and how do you guys actually get hold of this resource? So the idea will be that in the short term, from Friday, we're hoping that the spreadsheet will be available on the website. So what we will do is put on a downloadable spreadsheet on there, which you can keep, and then you can also play around and change the filters and make it more user-friendly to yourself if that's easier, so you can find all those resources. But our aim is to update that regularly. So if you should have any, you know, you want new resources, at the moment, that's probably a slightly clunky way of doing it, because you may end up with lots of different spreadsheets, but so you can just delete and swap out as you go. But we would like to try and, you know, once a month, once every couple of months, update that with new resources as and when they come in. But those resources need to come in and, you know, searched out by the community as a whole. So that's discussions going forward, is how we can actually keep that community active with depositing resources onto the site. In the medium term, the website resources, as I say, we're developing those and hoping to have that sort of in a good place by January 2021, so that there's lots of proxies on there, lots of different materials. At the moment, it's kind of in the basic structural and development phase. So we've tried to keep working towards that, and that's part of the intern's job, as I said. So that will be something that by next semester it should be available for you as a resource to use with either directly, as I say, send your students there, or that you can use as part of teaching material. And then in the long term, discussions that need to be had and think about is how we actually host this website, and is it the best way of doing so, and how we can make this a community project and make it accessible, and sort of not just it become one of those sites that sort of sits and accumulates dust and doesn't get updated. So to keep this active as part of the community. Just as a one quick note from Working Group 1, some of the things that Jane was talking about, you know, the aspects that we've done well and not done so well, and things that to improve on. From our point of view, I think something that came out talking with some of the wider groups is things like the development of perhaps beyond just dumping all of the resources into a spreadsheet, actually developing, say, an image bank that is, rather than having all the different resources together and you have to try and scroll through to find images, we can actually maybe have a dedicated image bank for images that we can use, so we don't all have to sit there and Google, you know, just before we're doing our lectures to try and find nice, pretty pictures that we're actually allowed to use in our slides, that we would actually have that image bank available to everybody. That's something that I think we would need people to volunteer to take this on. And again, it's that community involvement there that would help that go forward. And I think those are the two sort of main points of how we can actually, how do we keep that community active in the future? So good news is you'll have resources by Friday, and then by January for sort of wider resources. And I think it's been a really productive summer from our point of view. Everybody chipped in, and we had, as I say, lots of resources coming in. So as far as actually our group is concerned, I think it was a really nice win for getting some resources together for the teaching year coming up. So that's it from me, Jane. I will, do you want me to leave my screen up, or would you prefer if I stop sharing now?
No, that's fine. If you stop sharing, I think the only couple of comments that have come in are comments on the logo, of course. Logo design is nobody's forte, so it's a side project that's causing a lot of discussion. But also just emphasizing this point that making a website is in some ways the easy part, and that we need a plan beyond that. So in terms of making sure that a website can survive, and there are various comments about that, and again about medium and long-term plans, and that's definitely something that it's really clear that your group's been thinking about right from the beginning. There don't seem to be any questions yet. Obviously, if there are any, do keep asking them. And I say we've got plenty of time to pick them up this week. One note's about having interactive spreadsheets rather than static and downloadable, and adding resources. Just briefly say that the plan at the moment is to have a static downloadable spreadsheet and a separate page where people can submit resources, because that way things can be submitted and checked for the moment for the development stage. But you're right, for a longer term, you know, interactive spreadsheets then need to be monitored and looked after. But yes, at the moment, those two things are separated. And yes, we've had there's some discussion about the future of this, but I think maybe we'll pick that up later. So I think if we hand over now to Working Group 5, which is Matt Law, Karen and Meriel, who are going to give us some talk about the work of Working Group 5. That should take us nicely up to our first tea break. Okay.
Hello. Bear with me, I will. Okay, is everyone seeing what I hope they're seeing?
Yes.
We're seeing slides.
Good, that's good. Loading. Okay, yes, so we are Working Group 5. Again, quite a short talk from us, just outlining what we've done so far, giving some examples of how things might look, and talking about what our next steps are, really. You'll be hearing from me and also from Karen and from Meriel this morning. So our purpose really is twofold. We aim to identify the key resources, particularly coming from Working Group 1, and the resources developed by Working Groups 2, 3, and 4, and then come up with how-to guides that can be linked to specific intended learning outcomes, really to give you examples of how these resources might be used in your teaching. But we're also interested in how these resources are used in teaching and doing some pedagogic research around that. So we are planning and designing a research project that will be used across multiple universities in multiple countries to test the effectiveness of these resources. You'll hear a bit more about that later. We're led by a group of 6 who have been meeting very regularly, and there are 57 members currently signed up to Working Group 5. One of the first things we've done is a survey of all VIPs members, so hopefully you will have received an email about this. The survey is still open. Do get in touch with me if you haven't received an email about this. We asked people really three things: what their top three major concerns were, any specific concerns relating to software or specific modules or assessments they're doing, and also for examples of good practice. There have been 24 responses to date, actually 25 as of this morning. And the top five concerns really are recreating that hands-on experience that students will be lacking, keeping students engaged with the learning, the time commitment to take on work in unfamiliar platforms, learning how to teach differently, how we effectively replace fieldwork, perhaps closely related to concern number one there, and also whether students will actually be able to access online materials. In terms of major concerns people have, specific concerns people have flagged, working with GIS as something to look at. And in terms of good practice, we've had some examples of materials that are already available online. So col-pol, a key example. Carleton University has a tree ring website and an exercise based around paleotemperature from the Vostok core. And then the King's Centre for Visualization of Science has quite an extensive learning resource around Earthsea, the Iceman, as well. And I'm going to hand over to Karen now.
Okay, Matt, do you want to keep the slides or do you want to hand them over to me?
I'll keep doing it if that's okay.
Cool, yeah, that's great. Okay, so one of the things that we particularly wanted to do was to try and show how with existing resources that you could kind of mirror to a large extent the kind of the same set of learning outcomes and exercises for students. So essentially what we wanted to do was look at the pedagogic journey and see how we can take the resources that already exist. So we looked particularly at the ones that have already been identified from working group one, and how these can be used to kind of replicate a close to kind of standard learning experience for the students. So obviously it's not going to fully replicate being in the field or being in the lab, but there are lots and lots of resources out there that can help essentially, particularly right now when everyone is still kind of rushing to make sure that, you know, we have good teaching available for our students so that we can kind of keep the learning outcomes intact. So a common paleo environmental workflow tends to be something like taking a core, considering sediment dating, extracting pollen or some other subfossil, measuring or counting whatever it is that you've extracted, and then analyzing those data and producing a report. So how do you do that if you can't get into the field or the lab? So get the next slide there, Matt. There we go. Thank you. So what we've done is we've gone through the available resources and we've divided them into a couple of different activities, thinking about linking them specifically to learning outcomes. So in this case, activity one is taking a core. And the overall objective is to understand how evidence for past environmental change is retrieved during fieldwork. So if you were in the field and you were taking a core, that would still be what you want students to get out of this particular set of learning. So the learning outcomes then would be to describe why a core is used in paleoscience, to compare coring methods appropriate to different environmental conditions, to explain how to process cores, and to explain how to record cores. So these are all the same things that you would be doing in the field and maybe a little bit in the lab as well. So next slide, please. So this is quite a nice resource here, a kind of middle-length video, about 16 minutes, from Intimate Field School in 2013. And what they've done here is they've produced this really nice video that introduces the purposes of coring and demonstrates specifically lake coring and then subsequent interpretation of sedimentary record. So what you could do is you could set this, have students look at it, and then talk them through it. So this is a very, very good resource. Then if you want to look at a variety of other environments, here is a selection of various different videos that again are going to talk you through looking at coring in different environments. So we have ones for terrestrial sediments, looking at using a Russian type corer for peat coring, which would be very common for anyone who's coring out in peat, marine sediment corer, salt marsh coring, ice coring, and then using a livingstone corer for lake sediments. So each one of these videos gives you a good introduction to this, shows you what it's like, and may well be kind of more appropriate than the first video, or you may want to supplement it and highlight that there are different methods for doing this in different environments. But regardless, there's lots and lots of different resources out there for kind of giving you and your students an introduction to coring. And then there's also quite a nice open access book chapter that's linked there as well. So again, lots of different resources for this. So in terms of taking a core activity, there's quite a lot of information out there to replicate that and to kind of help you still get the same learning outcomes across to the students. Then still thinking about taking a core, we want to think about splitting, recording and subsampling a core. So again, you could do this to a certain extent in the field. If you're taking a peat core and just you want to look at it and get the students to kind of look at the different layers, but then you may well bring it back to the lab and sample it there. So these videos essentially help to replicate that again. So we have a step-by-step guide to splitting and recording a lake sediment core, then a website with descriptions of the Troll-Smith system, which is really nice. And then a really nice time-lapse video that shows the steps taken to subsample the core for different types of analysis in the field. So, you know, thinking about XRF, bulk density, loss and ignition, these kind of things as well. So again, showing the methods and explaining the rationale behind these lab procedures. And these are nice resources of different lengths. So, you know, depending on what you want, you might just want something really short, or you might want something with a little bit more depth in it, a little bit longer video. Then moving on to activity 2 might be something like sediment dating. So the objective here is to demonstrate an understanding of the principles of radioactive decay and its application to dating materials. Learning outcomes would be the measurement of, to measure the radioactive decay. In this case, we've selected barium-137 and calculated its half-life, to examine the half-life of carbon-14 and uranium-238, to estimate the dates of materials, and to summarize the methodology for radiocarbon analysis. So in terms of measuring radioactive decay for barium and calculating its half-life, there's a really nice set of videos available from the Jefferson Lab. And they have this series of YouTube videos that helps students to perform a half-life experiment. So the video goes through the stages of the experiment and the data processing, and the students are actually able to undertake data collection, data analysis, and calculate the half-life. So this actually is more interactive, and it allows the students to kind of get involved and do something as well. So this is a really nice active way to introduce radioactive decay. We also then have this resource here from Colorado, and it's looking at examining the half-life of carbon and uranium. And you can see it kind of goes through this in a step-by-step way. So you watch the number of atoms decay over time, observe the changing ratios over time, and then see what happens to the isotope upon the death of a tree or the cooling of a rock. So again, this is really nice and visual, and it's a nice explanation of radioactive decay that is, you know, very much aimed at undergraduate students. This is quite a nice sequence as well. Then from that site, you can use date materials, estimate the date materials using the University of Colorado's interactive game. So this is looking at, to a certain extent, gamification of education as well, and can involve the students. So once again, this is an interactive resource that's really nice. So students can then apply their understanding to estimate the age of the material. They need to choose the correct dating method, and they need to move the slider to the correct percentage of carbon or uranium to obtain a date. So again, interactive, and it should help them to stay engaged with the process. So it's not just looking at a video all the time. A lot of these resources are interactive, which is really great. And then there's this really nice summary video here from GNS Science in New Zealand. And they've a really detailed YouTube video on how to analyze, a really detailed YouTube video of how samples are processed for radiocarbon dating. So the video, students can then produce a summary or a protocol or prepare samples for radiocarbon dating. So when the students have gone through these different resources, they should be able essentially then to explain back and explain how this works. So they should still be coming out with the same learning outcomes as if you were discussing this in the lab. Activity 3 then is pollen analysis. Now obviously there's lots of other things that you could be analysing. Pollen was just the one that we picked for this particular talk. So the objective is to demonstrate understanding of the importance of pollen to paleoenvironmental science, and the learning outcomes include describing the importance of pollen in reconstructing past environments, examine how to make pollen slides, examine how to identify and count pollen, and convert pollen data into a pollen diagram. So again, there's quite a lot available for this. So really what you want students to do here is to be able to move from taking a core to looking at pollen on the microscope. So it's moving now from the field to the lab, but still in a virtual capacity. So there are two very nice intro videos here. The blue one, a fossil pollen analysis studying ancient vegetation, is really nice. It's an introduction to fossil pollen analysis. It's just over 9 minutes long, and it also links directly to an associated research paper. So you could use that to have an asynchronous, maybe short lecture intro, or read the video, look at the video, and then have a discussion with students around the paper. So this is quite a nice resource. Longer then is this video detailing pollen sampling from field to microscope, and they go through this in quite a lot of detail. So this is quite a nice video showing the different stages from being out in the field up to looking at pollen under the microscope. So one of the things that we did identify was that there was a lack of a really nice video detailing the lab procedure for pollen extraction, and there were a couple of people across ViPs identified this independently, and Martha has a video now and will be making it available soon. So that's great, because this is a major gap in terms of this particular type of analysis, was that this was quite lacking. But there are some nice videos explaining how to make pollen slide and also just the basics of pollen analysis. The one on the left there is quite good, because he shows how to make pollen slides essentially at home, so they're quite nice. So there are plenty of videos available. These two I think are particularly nice in terms of just introducing pollen analysis. And then I'm not going to talk too much about col-pol. You'll hear about that later, but col-pol is a really nice resource. And it's a software package that teaches basic identification skills. It's used before a lab class, but you can, it's really versatile, and this allows students to actively engage with trying to identify pollen. There's a complete microscopy practicals and simulation, so each student can count a unique slide and make a class diagram. It allows confident training on proxies by non-expert academics, so for general environmental courses as well. And it comes with 3 practicals to adapt and use. And if you have any particular questions about that, they're best directed towards Jane, I think. When you're still thinking about pollen analysis, there are lots of databases with real data sets that are also available to be downloaded and interpreted. And Neotoma in particular have lots of different databases that you can go in and you can actually download a data set and then use that for your students to have them try and interpret the paleo environment. What's nice about Neotoma is they're usually linked to a publication. So again, you can link that into talking about a particular paper. And there are lots and lots of guides to help identify pollen. So the one that is highlighted there is the University of Cambridge, which is focusing on UK pollen, but there are lots of others. There's North American ones and there's Australian ones as well. These are great because they usually have really nice images, and they will be very helpful just, in general, I think, for looking at trying to identify pollen. So there's some really nice resources available there. And then the final steps then of trying to then move towards producing a pollen diagram. Again, there are several different ways of doing this. The TILIA protocol there is highlighted, and that detailed protocols are available online from the Environmental Archaeology Lab in Boston, and it allows students to convert pollen data into a pollen diagram. And then if you are using OR with your students, there's also this nice resource on how to use OR to create pollen diagrams. So you can also tailor this to the software that you want students to use as well. So do you want something relatively simple? Do you want them to try and do it in Excel? Or do you want to try and have them do it in OR? And that will obviously depend on, you know, your own preferences and what software you're teaching the students as well. But there are multiple layers of options there. So overall, there are lots and lots of resources out there, and hopefully the collation job will be putting a lot of these in one place, because I think that's part of the challenge, is actually trying to identify these and find them, which can take quite a lot of time. So there are now lots going to be available in one place, and lots of the activities available online can be used to follow a similar set of desired learning outcomes, and you can use that then to model them on your existing assignments and just modify it and bring it into a virtual environment. So for example, using the existing resources, students can in this case describe the process and importance of taking cores. They can use existing pollen data to create pollen diagrams, and then they can use all of this to interpret the paleo environment of particular sites. So all of that is available once you know where to look. And there are lots and lots of other resources available online for these kind of activities, other activities, and other learning outcomes. So I'm going to pass over now to Muriel.
Thank you, Karen. So for the final 3 slides, what I'll introduce you to is what we're doing next. So the very next thing that we're going to do, and you'll be hearing about this in the next few weeks, is the launch of a survey. So this survey is to find out in 2 points in time, before and after our experience of the transition to online learning. So within this, we're going to focus on undergraduate teaching, and we're going to focus on the experience of the teacher for this survey. The stage we're at now is we're almost finished the survey questions, and we're just making sure we have ethical approval for these also. There's 3 stages in the survey. The first part, we collect some brief information about the participant, so things like general location. If we receive responses from a small number of participants in a certain country, then we can anonymize that. We can build that up to a larger area to ensure it's fully anonymous. We want to hear about their teaching experience that they have so far, and also their online experience and concerns about the shift to online teaching. Then it moves on to trying to find out about people's supports that they're getting for online teaching over the next year, looking at the local supports they may be getting from their institution, for example, the wider resources they may be drawing upon, and then also how are they accessing different resources and supports currently. So are they going through simple search engine queries or looking at specialist archives? And then we want to see how people are imagining they're going to engage with ViPs. So this survey will be sent out to the ViPs community, but we want it to be much, much broader than that as well. So thinking about, have people even heard of ViPs? If yes, are they contributing resources to our scheme? Are they users? What kind of resources will they be drawing upon? And how do they plan to apply those resources in their teaching over the coming year? So hopefully we'll get that survey launched within the next while, and then we'll have a follow-up survey afterwards to see how people got on with it. So then in the next steps that we'll be doing over the medium term, based upon the completed survey, so that's the one that Matt introduced you to at the beginning of our presentation, and continue engagement with the ViPs network, to think about those major priorities and concerns and to keep them foremost in our minds of the work group members and the wider community for the coming year. So thinking about where are those resources and where there's supports needed for those. We will be looking at those resources collated by the fantastic work done by Work Group 1 in collating all those resources, assessing those and their potential use in achieving learning outcomes. So as you've seen what Karen presented, what is central to what we're doing is thinking about what are the potential learning outcomes from all of these resources? How can they be used by the teaching community? So thinking about how best to do that, and perhaps target certain topics. You've seen how we have the sample journey that we've shown in terms of the pollen, and thinking about, is that the best way to go, or do we need to dip in and out of certain resources, and what's the best way to proceed? We can talk about that perhaps in the discussion tomorrow. And then what we want to do is continue to collate the pedagogic resources. So something that's a survey, hopefully some of you have heard about at least, where we're trying to collate academic papers and rubrics related to the teaching of online resources. We want to aid the community in identifying and accessing these resources. The reason we want to do that, Matt, if you can go on to the next slide, please. The reason we want to do that is twofold. So first of all, we want to support teachers who want to develop their own studies. So this may be something that you've been putting a lot of work into transition into online learning, and maybe you want to write that up and you want to publish it. So we want to be able to support you in that. You need to be able to write it up. You need to understand how you're making a new and a useful contribution. So we will have those resources available online for you so you can understand how to frame a study by yourself. Also, what we're hoping to develop are teaching evaluations to measure the success or indeed the failure of people's approaches, and perhaps through student feedback sheets. They're more difficult, of course, sometimes collating data on students. There's different ethical approval is required for that often than with staff and institutions, but we'll be working through that as well. And then the very final thing that we want to do in the longer term is develop a large scale study. So this is around the whole conceptual framework of the Virtual Palaeoscience project, and thinking about our experience in moving online and writing that up hopefully into a major study. Within that, we'll utilise the survey results, the survey I've just introduced you to. And at the moment, we're thinking of framing this within an action research approach. So that's linking the actions we'll be taking and the research driving that through critical reflection. So this is the approach we hope to take. You'll be hearing lots more about that in the workshop tomorrow if you join us for that. But in the discussion, what we want to talk about tomorrow, as well as thinking about what's most useful for the community. So that's central to all our actions within this. And also with some of the things we're doing, we're finding they're pretty resource heavy. There's for a small group of 6 of us, plus of course the wider work group members. So thinking for some of these things, we might have to have formal subgroups to support some of these initiatives. But we're looking forward to talking more about them today, and particularly in the discussion about them tomorrow. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Working Group 5. I don't see any particular questions that came in. Martin asked about whether the spreadsheet was likely to be fixed or interactive so people can automatically add resources to it. And we've decided for the moment that the spreadsheet available will be static, so it'll be something you download. And then as more resources come in, we'll update a new version of that, because that makes it easier to handle version control and moderation and so on. That's in the sort of short to medium term. But it is now just gone 12 o'clock, so I'd like to suggest that we take a comfort break or bio break or whatever it is you like to call getting away from your computer and moving and refreshing your teacup, and see you back here at 12:15. Hello everyone, my clock seems to think that it's 12:15, which suggests it's time that we should all be back with our cups of tea and so on. I've lost my piece of paper now. So what we're going to move on to now is presentations from the remaining 3 groups about what they've been doing in their particular areas. So first, Working Group 2, who were thinking about field trips, and I think Fabienne is going to present. So if, for that group, so if Kim can transfer slides and...
It should all be ready, so just have a go, Fabienne, and if not, we'll work it out.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. So so Well, I'm not going to repeat what has been said previously. So what I'm going to highlight is the progress we have made from the start of the meeting. So here's an overview of the coordinating team, so the people who have agreed to have some roles in organizing the ideas and everything else. So a little bit of the journey. So once the project has been launched and who has replied to the different work group, well, to be part of work groups. So about 60 members have expressed to be interested. So I quickly look at the belongings according to people, where people are. So, but it's mostly UK based, but we hope that, you know, in the future it'll be a bit more global. And then we had a few meetings, and we ended up to explore 4 areas in terms of developing resources, or what we think there are also gaps in resources. So the first one is to have a virtual field trip. The second one is a collation of existing resources, but it's an overlap between the different working groups, as we have seen previously. Also looking at maybe creating new materials about modern environment and some of the skills, but if it exists already, so there's probably no need for. And then also to produce a guidance how to make, you know, nice and clear videos of virtual field classes or field trips. So collation of existing material, creating a new field trip. So that will be also something that we need to think in the future. Adding materials to existing ones, as we are aware of. But this is a long-term project, so we are looking, you know, for next semester as a minimum, and for the future. We're also thinking that we probably need to apply for funding to create, you know, new virtual field trips in different places, because as we know, it's quite expensive to go to places. So we have to think about where to apply. So what has been collected, and again, this is a cross exercise with the different groups. So we have circulated a form to ask people what they want to do, or to have, and we have also thought what we want to see. So we're looking at, for instance, 4 different activities: modern environments. We have 9 that we want to see, but we haven't found any examples. Sedimentary recovery, we have seen already some examples. Field trips, for instance, and fieldwork activities. So you can see that between what we want to see and what we can find, there's still a gap, but as we are all working together, I'm pretty sure that we can populate that table here. So the creation of the new freestanding resources for for field skills could be videos and photos. So, but we need to give some guidance. How do we want to have these videos and photos? So that's a work in progress. And this is joining with the working group 5 in terms of learning outcomes, is to have the teaching field method, how to, you know, why are we covering, or why are we sampling, or why are we surveying certain type of landscapes, for instance. And then again, this is a close link with the working group 3 with a sample journey, so where the sample is coming from. Here, for the creation of the new material for modern environments, this is, you know, this is where we want to introduce a region that students won't be able to visit for either reasons or either the COVID presently, but in the future we can think that some students may not be able physically to go to some places. And we are, for instance, looking at fieldwork activities. So these are just some examples. For instance, measuring slopes, surveying vegetation, looking at rocks or landscape, measuring things. So these are just some ideas. So which area to focus on with regard to the field work? So we have done I'm going to try to see if I can share that. So we have created a Google document that we have been sharing to accumulate ideas, and I'm pretty sure you can't see this document. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide, and I'm going to share something else. Sorry for that. Can you see my the Google document, the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So this is what we started. So we just put on this document what we wanted to see, what sort of resources we wanted, and when we knew there was some video existing, and we just add the information. So this is where we started making a shopping list of the landscape we want to have in terms of field trips, the collection of samples, and then the activities that we can do in the field trip, and then we have likely lectures on field videos. So this is where the working group started to work with. So based on that discussion, sorry, I'm just shuffling between my videos, my presentation, sorry, going back here. I'm not going to go into these forms, but we created different forms that have been circulated to the working group members to get information what people wanted to in terms of which landscape or which activities, etc. So based on the answers, we are looking at volunteers to develop the following resources: the coring techniques, different cores for different environment, and I'm pleased that we have seen some examples with the working group 5, describing a core. That's again, we have seen some examples. Then sampling a core, logging, and exploration of different environments. In terms of landscape, this is where we have a wide range of interest, as you can see from the list here. And that, once we are, a global project, then we probably can have access to grassland and savannas, either in Africa or South America, some arid, semi-arid regions, etc. So this is the part that needs to be populated in the ViPs project. So this is where we were, and I think the next step is going to be to liaise with the other groups to make sure that we're not replicating efforts in collecting the data. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Fabienne. Did anyone else from Working Group 2 have anything to add? No. Great. So Working Group 3, and I think Martin is going to talk for Working Group 3 first.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'll do that. Sorry, I'll share my screen. There we go. So I think people can see this. So it's just going to be a very brief update. It's very similar or even less extensive than what we've just seen. This is just a list of people who kind of contributed a bit to this presentation, but there's a few more people, of course, in the group that has been contributing it to the working group 3 kind of leads or things. So here we go. So basically these were the tasks that we had, basically to look at gaps in resources, to go from where any samples arrive from the field in the lab and then into interpretation. So this is the bit, the first bit is the sample journey, as we kind of titled it. And then the second bit, and that Steve Juggins will talk about that in a second, is about col-pol and how that might be adapted to other proxies as well. So I'll say a little bit on this first focus part. So we kind of broke up this the sample journey into these 8 steps. This is a bit arbitrary. I mean, you can make the steps differently. It doesn't really matter. But, and of course, the first 2 steps kind of overlaps greatly with what we just heard from Fabienne from Working Group 2. So we are aware there's this overlap, but we kind of, when we started, I think everybody was just kind of finding their way. So we kind of kept these steps in here. And then going to sampling or taking subsamples from those core, looking at material, preparing it chemically in order to be able to then create microscope slides or do other analyses required for biological proxies, analysis of chemical proxies, physical properties. And then there's a whole area which is a bit of a container for I think various bits and pieces, but to have some statistical analyses on the data. And that includes, I guess, chronological data, so age depth models, things like that. So what I'll do is, I don't know if my screen sharing is still successful. Can you see?
Yeah, Martin, we can see everything.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So basically, this is a very similar spreadsheet to the one that Fabienne just showed, where we cut this down. So there's videos, there's YouTube videos, or other materials in these different headings. You can also see what we put. Oops, sorry.
Martin.
Yeah.
Sorry, should you be sharing the spreadsheet at the moment? Because we can't see the spreadsheet. We can just see the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll see if I can do, just a second. Here we go. I'll probably just share my desktop, so because I'm flipping between the 2. Is this better? Can you see the?
Yeah, thanks very much.
A spreadsheet now. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so this is very similar to what Fabienne just showed. Spreadsheet with various resources, kind of titles. There's a number of things in here that we've identified that might be useful. And some people have already kind of, let's say, volunteered themselves to kind of create a resource at some point, and where possible, there is kind of an indication of when this might be available. So this is, if this is video materials or other kind of materials, when people said, yeah, I'll do this, in many cases, there's a date there as well. So, so I won't go through all of this in detail, but I'll flip back to my PowerPoint, which hopefully you'll then be able to see as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay. So basically, things about kind of probably description of material, there's a bit more needed in terms of how to sample and subsample, we're probably okay. For various proxies, there's probably a bit more needed. So this is to do with various different, so other than pollen, I should probably say, but things like chironomids, maybe diatoms, etc. We could do with some more videos, I think. So some people have already indicated that they could look at things or could provide something. But I think if there is people in the community that want to contribute something, that's probably quite important steps to make that visual as a alternative to lab-based preparation or lab-based practicals. So going to the identification of biological proxies. I think the focus has been on col-pol, which Steve will say something about in a minute, Steve Juggins. Chemical properties were probably okay because there's quite a few videos out there. And then the physical properties of sediments, that's probably more, but the main thing is I think on the stats. And Steve has just sent me a message. Steve Juggins just said like he's developing some R videos and other tutorials, but that will not be until next semester, so the second semester next coming academic year. So this is also something that if you have anything, so if you're listening to me talking about this and you've got something that you think, oh yeah, that would actually be great, please still add it to this spreadsheet. I mean, you can add things as well, because I think there's still a bit more to do. Finally, we kind of had some discussions about how to make videos, because you know, various people said, well, oh yeah, I'll be making videos this summer. A few things which are also in that Google sheet. So sorry, I'm just flipping back and forth, but so video requirements and some resources for video editing, so with various links as well. So if people wanted to look at that, basically, you know, we think better shorter videos than long ones, multiple short ones rather than one very long one. So you can always add several in a row. Using a stand from looking at various videos online to have a stable position, lighting condition, where you can read the whole different things here. I think one of the things that is quite important, if you're planning to do any outdoor video making, to use either a wind-shielded external microphone, or later on do a voiceover rather than using original sound. So just kind of a bit of planning in that sense. These things are not that expensive anymore. I mean, you can get something like this for about £60 or something like that. So that shouldn't break the bank. And then finally, I'll show, I won't show the whole video, but just an example of what we thought was quite good video. Is one here. Where you can see they've annotated in the video, you can see there's various bits where in the video you can see arrows, you can see kind of explanations of kind of highlighting something. So that might be useful if we're thinking about videos, and also with some of the help of the resources on editing. That might be something to look into. So I think that's it really for me. I'll probably hand over to Steve now to say a bit on col-pol, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Very quiet.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Right. So I'm just trying to find my screen. Oh. Just 1 second. Sorry about this. Okay. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Great. Okay, hello everyone. So several people have already spoken about col-pol, so I won't say a lot about it. It obviously fits into that sample journey Martin has just talked about in terms of learning microfossil identification and the process of going through counting microscope slides. I think at the start of lockdown, I think like many of us were wondering about how we're going to run our practicals next year, in particular sort of microscope practicals. And then at the first VIP meeting, Jane demonstrated this and thought, oh, absolutely fantastic. It's a really neat piece of software with a really good image data set, which can kind of simulate the process of learning identification and counting a slide. So it can replace practicals where these are not possible. But I think I'm now persuaded that this is a fantastic tool to use alongside normal real microscope practicals as a sort of pre-training to enhance existing practicals. So this is, and I think if it was a case of muddling through the next year, I think I would have just probably cancelled my microscopy practicals for this year. But I can see there's a certain kind of long-term gain to be had here by using this sort of software to complement normal practicals. So I think it's worth investing some additional effort into further developing this tool. So the situation we're at the moment is we've got this fantastic software that Jane has described. It has a set of UK pollen images. It's got some great documentation and a series of ready-to-go practicals. It runs on Windows. But the great thing is it doesn't have to be installed. So students can just download the software and click on the executable, and it'll run on almost any Windows computers. We've done some testing. It will also run from a network drive, and it seems to work across kind of remote virtual desktops that many of us are using in our UK universities. So students can either download and install it on their own PC, or they can use it across a network using a PC or a Mac. It's got pollen data at the moment, pollen images at the moment, but it is relatively easy to import other image data sets. The key requirement is they need to be square, and size is not really a limit, but smaller images will just load faster. The pollen images in there are 320 pixels square. The important thing is they all have to be the same magnification, i.e. the numbers of pixels per micron. Many of us will have collections of images, but I think fewer are actually taken with these sorts of requirements in place. So where images don't meet these criteria, there's this fantastic piece of software called Image Magic, which you can use to batch process irregular shaped images and images of different magnifications to process them to meet this criteria. I think the problem is that although we've got sets of images for various microfossil groups, we don't have the kind of complete, comprehensive, multiple images for each taxon kind of data set that you'd need to simulate actual pollen counting, slide counting. So the limitations at the moment we've only got pollen, a really good image data set for pollen. And although the software is really neat and really good, it's impossible to modify it in any way now. So we can't change the behavior, we can't add new features. So we're in W3, we've got these aims then to extend col-pol to include other proxies and to update the software to add new features and improve its flexibility, and in particular make it available on, make it easier to use on multiple computer platforms like PC and Mac. So we put calls out and had various volunteers to create new image data sets. As I say, various people have got existing images, but I think none are actually as comprehensive enough to produce a set of practicals for simulating actual slide counting. So adding new proxies will involve creating new image data sets. We've not had access to microscopes, so this means that this is really heading for semester 2, given the amount of work involved of generating a new image data set. And the list there, I won't go through them all, but we've got offers of tropical pollen, various diatoms, 4-iams, chironomids, and so on. So there's a list, and I've no doubt this will grow in the future to cover a range of additional proxies. The bottom comment there, if people do have existing images that could be imported into col-pol, please get in touch. We can help people get those images in and experiment with them and get something up and running if you need it earlier than semester 2. In terms of software, We've had discussions about how to update the software, whether to implement it in R, whether to use R and Shiny. Shiny is a package in R that's really good for building interactive dashboards that can run in a web browser, or whether we should develop it as a standalone program. I initially thought we could program it in R. The advantage is it's quick, it can run on a PC or Mac, but the downside is it's got a potentially very limited user interface if you do it in raw R. And of course, anyone using it then needs to install R or use it across a virtual network. If you use the Shiny package, you can develop applications with a more elegant user interface, and they can run locally on a local installation, or you can set up a thing called a Shiny server that will allow your application to run in a web browser remotely. But the Shiny server is rather specialized. Most university networks won't have one, so it's actually quite difficult to set it up yourself. You can use a commercial Shiny server, but these are quite expensive if you have kind of potentially hundreds of users. Or you can develop it as a standalone application, and there are various ways of doing this. And one of the things we're looking at, or I'm looking at, is using this Qt cross-platform toolkit. Doing it standalone obviously means you can make it, it's completely flexible. You can target multiple platforms, so you can run on a PC and a Mac. And we could also run it installation free from a web server, so students could use it, access it remotely in a web browser using this WebAssembly. So it could be the same application that can run locally or remotely. The advantage of this is it allows us to have complete flexibility, but it's got a longer development time. But I think in this case, we're already looking at semester 2, and semester 2 is realistic for this. So we're looking at developing across different sorts of platforms at the moment. I'm going to be working on a Qt version and aim to have that ready for semester 2. And Martin Blau has started work on a prototype R version. And if anyone's interested in having a look at that, you can contact him directly, and I'll put his email on there. And the bottom line then is, please get in touch if you want to contribute image data sets, you want to contribute ideas about user interface, or if you want to act as a beta tester for the software. Okay, so I think I'll stop there, and if there's any questions, I've lost my my chat window. I think I need to close this, don't I?
Thank you very much, Steve. There doesn't seem to be, I don't see anything in the chat that is specifically about what you were just talking about with the col-pol project. There are some questions about formats of delivery for sample journey and so on for how people are actually teaching virtually, but I think that's something that we can maybe move to the discussion groups this afternoon. Kim, did you see any particular questions that needed?
No, I haven't seen it, Jane.
Great, thank you. So, and we'll move on to working group 4, which is from Tim Lane and Danny Pearce are going to talk about the progress of the expert lectures group.
Thanks, Jane. Tim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Are you all right to start? Yeah. You can see the screen?
Yes.
Fab.
Cool. Yeah, so thanks, everyone. Myself and Danny are going to present a sort of short update on where we're up to on behalf of our coordinating group for Group 4, so which is sort of looking at guest lectures and how that can fit into the broader sort of project, and where it can fill some gaps and provide something which some of the other working groups can't. So the sort of key tasks we identified quite early on were that there's a lot of material out there, which I think we've already seen from the previous talks, especially the collation group. There's a lot of material out there for paleo-environmental teaching, and collating it is very, very important. So we don't want to really duplicate anything directly which we already have access to and can, with sort of the Creative Commons license that Jane mentioned, give and sort of provide to people. So Working Group 1 has done what seems like an amazing task with that so far. And we've also collated some other lectures we found. There might be some crossover, but hopefully we found some more extra stuff as well. And we have a list of, when this was sort of first announced, a list of people who are interested in either delivering or sort of giving their time to give us one of their guest lectures, and also some requirements, so what they would like to see. So that, but that was a bit of a smaller number of people replied about that. So it's mainly people asking for what, mainly people offering what they could deliver, what their expertise were. So the sort of key thing that we want to do is sort of find a list of what will be useful to people, which is hard to know, but at the very least not reproduce things identically, because I think that's a waste of time for all of us when we're busy enough as we are. And I think, especially from seeing the other talks, there's the potential for some duplicity, and it's really important that we're not asking someone to devote their time and record themselves giving a lecture on something, I don't know, something to do with, say, coring, because that's come up a lot, and then we've already actually got a lot of resources on that. And we sort of acknowledge that there's going to be a difference in stuff that's already available and stuff we almost commission or we ask people to do. And we wanted to sort of talk to the Working Group 5 to have a protocol for the new resources and ensure that we make the material as accessible as possible. So both in terms of having subtitles, closed captions, thinking about if it can be translated to languages, because there are other languages than English, and people where English isn't taught are also going through the same issues we are. So looking into that, but also thinking about leveling. So are we asking for something that's going to be aimed more at a final year student, or something that's going to be aimed at a first year student, and trying to make sure we get the most sort of, I guess, bang for a buck, and that it can help as many of us as a sort of a group as possible. So they're the sort of ideas, and then we would then, or hopefully then, we'll go forwards in the near future to be creating these resources and making them available on a sort of, as soon as they're ready, we can put them out and advertise them, and they can be used by staff. Cool, next slide. Cool, yeah, so this is where where we're at now is finding these critical gaps to try and highlight them. And I think we have a fairly varied coordinating group, which is good because each of us has certain gaps in our own teaching that we want to be covered, and we want to avoid this sort of just focusing on certain things, because that's what we're worried about teaching. So we're going to liaise with the collation group to make sure we can identify some of these gaps, and then cross-correlate or combine that with the needs that were submitted by the members in the first case, and then also the stuff that was offered by members, because I think those who were very forthcoming in saying they want to help out, we should focus on, because they can clearly offer us something relatively quickly, and they're happy to do so. Cool, over to you, Danny.
Thanks, Tim. So yeah, I'm just going to go through some of the things that we thought of early on with this group, and really what I think hasn't been mentioned by any of the groups so far is that what's really nice about this project is that members of each group, working group, are quite often also associated with another group, and that's really good because it means that we can essentially avoid that sort of duplication, and we can also find out quite easily what the other working groups have been discussing and include that within our remit. So when we first got together, we were very keen on having a balance of people in this working group, and I think what's really nice is that we've got more experienced academics, ECRs, and also PhD students, and I think it's really nice to have that mix. We decided that we wanted for each video or guest lecture, we wanted clear learning outcomes. So I'm talking about the ones that we're looking at developing, not the ones that are already out there. So the ones that we're looking at, we wanted to have clear learning outcomes for the students. And we also wanted each sort of video or guest lecture to have associated reading list or a paper. So that links quite nicely with the website, so they can then click in, as Kim was saying, about this sort of web of knowledge, if you like, that they can sort of learn more about that topic and other proxies. We also wanted to have recommended timings because, as you know, like you might give someone 10 minutes and they go to 20 minutes, but we really wanted to look at having a mixture of slightly longer 15-minute guest lectures, but also 2 to 3 minute, maybe 5-minute bite-sized lectures. That could be on certain topics like Schmidt-Hammer or a dating technique. And so they're really nice for students to dip in and out of. We also thought about language as well. So obviously, you know, in academia, English is the prevailing language, but actually we wanted, you know, as all the working groups do, want this to expand out into other countries. And so we didn't want students to feel that their language was a barrier. So we're looking at actually having either subtitles, but actually I think we're leaning more towards having a transcript so that students can view the transcript in their own time. And we're also looking at possibly developing it into other languages. But really for WG4, our remit is really looking at more medium to long term plan. In terms of the platform, as the other working groups have sort of mentioned, you know, that there is life beyond PowerPoint. It could be videos out in the field, it could be, you know, in the labs. So we wanted a really nice mixture. And also we wanted the sort of presenters, if you like, to have an engaging experience with the students. In terms of diversity, I think this is really important. You know, this came up quite early on. Someone asked, you know, is this just a UK project and UK focus? And really that's not what it's about. You know, yes, it was initiated in the UK, but actually we want a much greater geographical focus spanning multiple countries. So the presenters that, you know, that have offered and also that we would approach will have different geographical locations, gender, ethnicity. But also we wanted to include PhD students and ECRs because actually they're a really nice bridge between, say, more advanced academics and the students, and quite often the students like being taught by PhD students. So that's where we're at the moment. What we've done is we've come up with say guest lectures or videos, and we've really identified what we thought was good or what was poor about a video. So that could be something due to the weather or the sound, because we want to take these sort of protocols forward. So really these are just some examples of what we thought were good, and, you know, having that really nice sort of the imagery with the descriptions, and then you can have this as essentially background which supports the guest lectures. So in terms of moving forward, as you probably realised by now, you know, the collation group and the pedagogy group have had a huge job to do. And as Tim mentioned, we didn't really want to move forward with too much without knowing what those gaps were. So we're at that stage now where we are starting to identify those sort of critical gaps. And it doesn't have to be, you know, as you're probably getting the idea, that it doesn't have to be a lecture as such. You know, it could be field methods, practicals, flipped classrooms, and we want our guest lectures to be able to support all of those methods moving forward. And also, as moving forward, we naturally sort of have to liaise with the other working groups in terms of intellectual property issues, and this is something that came up really quite early on that I think we've worked quite tirelessly on, all working groups, to really nail this for moving forward. So really that's where we're at the moment, and we're happy to take any questions. So I'll just stop sharing.
Thanks, Danny. So no particular questions came up. but there was a little bit of a discussion about the things that people are teaching and how people are teaching, and that as people are going to be starting teaching in a few weeks, to communicate and to get on, you know, to communicate with each other about what's going on. I think Simon's now got to the point of making up an acronym. Is it ViPs G&T? With the suggestion that we might think about maybe having a support group of some kind that might be like a monthly drop-in time when we can come and talk about teaching matters. Have I done something to this? Yes, I have. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button again. So I've seen a couple of positive comments this morning that people would like to get in touch and talk about, say, this process of developing teaching. There've also been more points coming up about actually using resources and the different ways we might use resources. As ViPs, we very much want to be presenting a toolkit rather than trying to create rules of how people should do things. But I think it's also very much the intention of Working Group 5 to be providing some support and suggestions about how materials might be used. And I think what's coming out from this meeting is that even very experienced lecturers are not getting much support from their institution with some really basic questions when you're really stressed about how we do things. It looks like there's quite a lot of people teaching paleo in semester 1 who would like the idea of a support group. So that's definitely something we'll take forward. Any other comments or questions for any of this morning's speakers? Yes, and Helen mentions that almost looking at the pedagogy paper at pedagogy summaries might be really useful. As I say, within the pedagogy group, we've kind of been thinking in two ways about resources that are immediately useful, even if they're not actually a paper, and then but collecting and recording what we're doing in the hopes of turning that into papers. Since obviously that is academic currency, and since we're all working our backsides off to make this new thing work, we might as well get some currency out of it. Anything else in the way of comments, suggestions? Anyone else on the steering group want to say anything?
I think it sounds like it's been a really positive few months, despite the fact it's been really busy and stressful for everything. So I think it just, you know, just to say that I think it seems like everything's coming together, Jane, here. And I think this afternoon's discussion will be really positive based on all that we've heard there.
Brilliant. So let's break slightly early for on my rough plan for lunch, which is great because the more time we actually have to deal with these things. So if we can be back here at 1:45, sorry, at 1:45, which is 13:45, and we'll then take some time for small group discussions. So what we'll do, everyone will come in, Simon will kind of recap what we want the groups to do, and then whoever's here will just put you into random small groups so you can have a nice time, you can discuss whatever you want to discuss with some other people who are interested in it. And then we'll come back together into plenary to summarise what we've found out during the day and talk about what's coming next. Does that make sense?
Jane, just to say very quickly, looking at the chat line, there's a number of people who sort of possibly volunteered to feed back their experience from semester 1. So the point to capture that, if we could put that in the feedback sheets, that'd be really useful so we don't lose that. I think it's a really great idea.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. I'll go and fiddle with the webpage in my lunch hour. Okay, great.
So it could be added as a comment at the bottom of the feedback sheet. No changes required.
Well, I'll add a note, but no, that's great. Right, so lunchtime. I think if Kim, if you'd like to share the holding slide, and we'll see you all after lunch. All right, Simon, would you like to start us off?
screen. Share screen. Can you see that? That says discussion points.
Yeah.
Right, that's much less exciting. So the idea was that we would put, as people came back, and before the break we had 40 participants, and the last time we had 25, we were going to put people into groups related to what you heard this morning, because what we want now is to get some input, some feedback. The whole premise of, well, not the whole premise, but an important part of ViPs has been trying to get people to do it themselves, to work as a group, to work collaboratively. So these were some of the points that I thought would be useful for the discussion group. So do you like what you've seen or what you've heard? Have we made ourselves clear? Or actually, to the working group, that may be clear how they're going about things, but from looking from outside in, are there any barriers to use? Is there anything we've missed? It would be a real shame to carry along the same track and then find out we actually made a mistake and have to go backwards. So that was the first question. Second question, are we on the right track? Are we actually going in the right direction? Is this what you want? Is this what you think we need? Have we got the right emphasis? And by emphasis, I was thinking, we've talked about making it available for undergraduates, but actually there's a lot of this more suitable for postgraduates, PGT, or for the outreach dimension. Are we on the right path? Are we going in the right direction? It's not too late to maybe tweak that a little bit and make sure we're providing what's required, what people need. Are there any gaps? In the talks, it's clear that there are overlaps between the working groups, and there always have been, and there always probably will be. But in those gaps, are we sort of working too hard to do one particular aspect, and you're not really bothered about that, or are there things that we've missed, either things that are of particular interest to you, or you think hopefully would be of wider interest, either in terms of a topic. There's nothing about paleosols, for example. There's nothing about Lewis. There's nothing about your aspect. Or maybe you think, actually, do you know what? There's nothing about cave sediments. That would be a really cool extra dimension, not necessarily to do in the main lecture series, but something to, and when you've read all about the things I need to do about, what about looking at this? So can you name anything we've missed in terms of an environment, a time frame? Can you brainstorm? Can you list some of those? Okay, how can we fill these gaps? What we've tried to do since May, the working groups have worked really hard, and we've competed against a moving time frame of submissions and everything else that's along. We were hoping to gather the low-hanging fruit. Have we missed anything? But are we missing a trick? Are there other resources out there? Are there different ways we might be doing this, different links, hookups, things going on in different parts of the world that we don't know about, that might help us to address some of these gaps? And finally, we'll ask this question again, and we'll ask this question again in the feedback forms that were previously mentioned. I'm thinking about accessibility. What in terms of accessibility in terms of, well, are spreadsheets the right way to go? Is there the website? Can we get into that website? Can you find your way around? People have talked about, are we preparing a whole series of lectures that would fill a whole module, or are we going to go in and dip in and dip out? Accessibility in terms of the font, in terms of the structure, accessibility in terms of what we need. So they were the five key sort of areas I was hoping each group would report back on. We're going to put you, that's Kim, our Zoom host, is going to allocate people to groups. And then within those groups, you have a relatively short period of time to work on that. Hopefully, within that, somebody will elect themselves to be scribe and can report back on that. And so you have, ultimately, we have until about 2:45, short break, and then the plenary will pull all that together. So if I hand back to Jane or Kim, I'll stop sharing for now. Did I miss anything?
Nope. Not that I can think of.
Okay, so the groups then. We have 24 participants.
So I can do something like 7 to 8 participants per room.
Yeah, do that.
Okay, so it's just going to randomly assign people, and I will draw everyone back once we're sort of on the right sort of time frame.
Hello, that we are all in the main session. So the idea is that we will come back at, we'll go into plenary at 3. So if people can be ready with 2 or 3 points from their discussion group to put in then, we thought we might all need to refresh our cups of tea after talking for an hour. So we'll see you at 3. My clock makes it 3. I don't know how other people are doing.
I'm ready.
Grand. I don't completely trust my clock. Right, well, hello everyone. Whoops. Nikki has put in some virtual field trip examples using Google Earth and then story maps on different geomorphic environments. Just drop that into the chat. So I think you've already put those in the thingy, haven't you? Thingy. Spreadsheet. That kind of thingy. But other than that, nobody's put things in the chat yet. So I guess the first thing to do is to ask each group if they'd like to, if somebody from each group would like to put something in the chat about their response to Simon's categories of questions. So I guess we lump the first 2 together. Do your groups think that we are essentially on the right track? That this is useful, this is worth having? Yeah, more links coming in. Fantastic, thank you. The second one was about what's missing, where the gaps are, and also how we can fill them, which is, I think, the thing that we've just had 2 reminders that past is available for data analysis. That's a useful gap fill. And the third one was about how we might use the material. So if we maybe if somebody from each group is willing to write a sort of short response to, you know, what if they have a key point about each of those in the chat. Then that will give us input from you to carry on with what we're doing. What have I done now? So I think one key question which various people have been asking about is the timing of release of materials. So rest of the group, other group leads, jump in if I'm off track or wrong or whatever. But my understanding is that a first version of the static static spreadsheet is intended to go out by this Friday. We gave ourselves a couple of days to recover from workshopping and sort things out, because there's always things to sort out. Other things, certainly I think some groups are mentioning by Christmas, some things are, other things are things like, sorry, I looked at the chat and I've lost my thread. The spreadsheet will come out, and then some things are like the journey, the pedagogic journey that Karen presented. Those slides will be available tomorrow or Wednesday. It's just we'll put the slides up on the Canvas site. So, sorry, on the Canvas site. I'm clearly getting into teaching mode, on the website, so that people can just download that and use those slides even before it's produced into something nice and tidy. Other projects may take a little bit longer. I think something that came out in the group that I was in was that there was a general sense that it would be really useful to have a list of what expert talks have been solicited and a plan to be solicited and so on, because that was seen as a resource that could very easily be added in. Even if you'd already planned out the semester, it'd be very easy to add 15-20 minutes of talk and to really enhance the student experience, giving them some extra materials. So there's some general consciousness of sorry, people are writing comments and getting confused. Simon, did you say you made some notes? Would you like to feedback for group 2? And then we can, that gives 1 and 3 time to write in the chat.
I missed the start because I was in the room, out the room, in the room, out the room. But anyway, so there may be bits I missed, and hopefully somebody will add in the chat line if I have. But a lot of the initial discussion was about accessibility, and I know this is something that the working group, the coordinating group have talked about in terms of accessibility being, just as we have to be mindful of data protection and intellectual property rights, then we need to be mindful of accessibility requirements as well. And to that end, we were talking about sort of the student, from the student perspective, the accessibility of lots of really heavy videos and links and data and things, and what about the poor soul who's trying to use things on a mobile phone. The one practical suggestion, which was my comment that put you off about needing an extra column, for the spreadsheets, just as we looked at, there's a descriptor, there's a timeline, maybe we could put in something that's suitable for a mobile phone, or not data heavy, or maybe the other way around, this is a really heavy, this is a really slow link, or whatever. Just so, particularly if these lists were going to students, we can't make everything accessible to everything. We've cut out a lot, but maybe that extra column might flag up where the resources that were more accessible or less accessible.
Yeah. I suspect more than the mobile phone, the key question is going to be internet, because I actually I find my phone's better at videos than my computer. So my computer doesn't have a great graphics card, but my internet is a problem regardless.
Yeah, but it's something to
yeah, it's definitely something to add to the list, and it would be really useful to know.
So we just thought maybe if there's an extra column and there could be a sort of I don't know, even if it's just a smiley face, or because it's just a collection of photos at a lower res, or something that's a kind of warning face or something like that. It's something to think about.
Yeah, the challenge is likely to be working out a standard way to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's particularly ethical to send an intern out to find an internet black spot and stand in it with their phone. I don't think it would be allowed under COVID regulations.
All right. We went on to discuss, there was a lot of discussion also about interaction between working groups and the way, and sometimes it was, I kind of explained what we talked about in one of our meetings about how we did have a presentation by working group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it occurred actually 1, 5, 2, 3, 4 made more sense.
Yes.
But we felt that there was some overlap, and that was inevitable and absolutely fine. But maybe this might be the point at which these working groups evolve. Maybe some of these working groups, as I guess we've often thought, are task and finish. Maybe, for example, working group 1 now is done. They've collated the resources. There's some tinkering, there's some updating, but actually we don't need a large group of people collating resources anymore. That was our short-term goal, and we've done that. And maybe some better effort would be to push people, push your resources towards working groups 2, 3, 4, and 5. And also maybe to think about how those working groups are subdivided and fit together.
That is what discussion 4 is for tomorrow when we've got to the end of the day.
Okay. But one practical suggestion, last thing I'll say is one practical suggestion was maybe working group 2 is not so much about, was about field trips, but maybe about the trip, maybe about understanding the landscape, that landscape scale perspective rather than technique orientated. Maybe that was more working group 3, the nitty-gritty individual techniques. So there is an overlap, but we can't, in our group we like the idea of working group 2 being about sort of landscape scale rather than working group 2 being sort of more more techniques, more the sample story, more lab orientated. And that was one potential way of splitting that we thought about. And so maybe with that reorganization, that evolution of working groups, maybe one or more of those working groups could start to think about, okay, we've collated stuff. Now it's about where the gaps are, about the evolution, and maybe publish a list and get people to sign up against those lists of missing resources.
That's what tomorrow afternoon's for. Well, Liz has already made a list of missing resources and sent it around the mailing list, but I think she didn't get many replies because it was the middle of August. So we'll definitely add that to go round again.
Yeah, I think that would be valuable. And then that we were sort of talking about what those topics would be, but also about the narrative around those topics, rather than here's a collection of slides, here's a collection of bits and pieces. This is how you might use them. This is how they fit together. These are the links. So that was, roughly speaking, chat room 2. Hopefully I've not missed anything. If I have, please add to the chat.
There's one or two things have just come up in the chat, Simon, that we talked about. There's a thread running through there now about have institutions discuss the technology needs, the access needs, and so on.
Yeah. And I think in some ways that's really out of our control, in that it's got to be, digital poverty is an institution level issue. But it is definitely something that came up in working in group 1 as well, in that we were talking as also about the need to break things down into small chunks for students who are struggling with the area they're working in and so on. And we also brought up the issue of transcription of video for people who struggle with video. Because video, if you have any kind of hearing difficulties, for example, video is a bit of a nightmare. And we got a bit distracted into talking about transcription and about those accessibility issues. And I don't think I'm misrepresenting things to say we kind of came around to the 2 points, one of which was it's not really in the remit of ViPs. This is institutional and sector-wide issues of digital poverty and technology. But secondly, that we had to remember that this is still emergency teaching, that we're still trying to throw something together during a global pandemic. I don't know about you, but I still have no university issued equipment at home. I'm still doing everything on my own gear. There's no plan for dealing with, there's so many things that actually we need to give ourselves a break. Hi, Dave.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. And it's an institutional issue, but it is something we can usefully at least bear in mind when we're designing the resources. Some people have made some good suggestions about simply posting small downloadable packages rather than one big one, that kind of thing.
Can I just add to that, because we've had the same kind of conversations, but in some cases I've had colleagues suggesting that we should simplify things, but then it kind of really undermines what we're trying to do. So for instance, I use Google Earth with like a storyline thing, and we had some students who couldn't access it because they had really poor bandwidth. So somebody suggested that we should basically just take photos of the images. And I think at what point, I'm kind of at that point where I think actually that's where I have to draw the line, because at some point, where do we stop bringing it down to the lowest possible common denominator, and what our responsibilities are to provide something that's super accessible for somebody who's just got a mobile phone. And I'm really struggling with that.
And Eileen has made a point that it's possible to set up your Google Earth so that instead of downloading all the images and information together, you can download it as multiple pieces, and that can help get around the issue. So putting up images and overlays as a series of small files, not just one big one, and things that can be dealt with. And what can students get access to? I mean, we had certainly had problems with students who were doing absolutely fine, but they were using the university library. And when they lost access to public libraries, That became a big problem. But that's really not...
No.
Our responsibility, as I see it, is to produce stuff that's compatible with things like screen readers, that's capable of being compressed, that doesn't force every student to watch videos for 5 hours a day, because we've got some diversity. But there has to be a point when we just do what we can.
Yeah.
I think something that came up a little bit in group 2 was that it's not necessarily about simplifying the totality of what we do. It's about making sure that we're really, really clear and break down the early steps, so that we don't lose students at the beginning who you'd catch at the beginning of a practical when they were confused.
Yeah.
It's about being really explicit and walking them through stuff so that they get their footing.
Is it, Jane, is it also about providing a mixture of material that will be suitable for the lower and higher users, in the sense that if we try and produce material which is only suitable for somebody with a laptop who can download the material versus somebody who can only watch the material on a phone, should we be making sure that our modules essentially provide enough of a mixture that even if you only have a mobile phone, you can still capture a modicum of what is being expected?
I think Dave had some point on that.
Yeah, well, yes, I think we should be considering that, or even though it's a lot more work. But I did exactly what you were just suggesting a few minutes ago, Nikki. At short notice in March, I put together a one-day virtual field trip to replace a site visit we were going to do to a clay pit, and I used Google Earth, but to make sure we didn't leave anybody behind, I also provided all of the photos, all of the images in a PDF file, so that if someone couldn't use Google Earth, they could at least download the PDF and work on that at their own pace. It's not ideal, but I don't think we should accept any suggestion of working to the lowest common denominator. We've got to try and engage the students by using the technology as far as possible. But at the same time, we mustn't leave anybody behind. We have to be inclusive.
It's remembering as well about diversity of access. I mean, I complained about Google Earth earlier. I actually have a lot of trouble with it because I find it really hard to make the text readable. And I find the way it zooms in and out actually makes me feel sick after a while. And I have a particularly weird combination of eye condition and the way my brain works. I know a lot of students don't, but there are students who struggle with a lot of those things. There are students who really struggle with videos because they can't concentrate on them. Incidentally, speeding them up really helps. So if you ever have a student who's got ADD and or ADHD and is struggling with videos, tell them to watch them faster. Something that makes it harder and keeps them in. But I think it's something I really like the idea of adding the extra column. And if anyone knows of a good, consistent method of measuring how bandwidth heavy something web resources are, I'd appreciate it if you let us know, or even volunteered to fill in the column with it. And I think there's a lot of flagging up of saying these sorts of things flag up with Working Group 5's work on thinking about what's useful. Another thing that came up was about group work as well, and if there's where students would normally discuss with each other and ways to try and make that friendly, and that also comes right into pedagogy. Right, I'm just going to have a quick flip through the chat and see if there are lots of
the points about missing resources, Jane. So stats being something we discussed in our groups about, can we, the stat stuff is something to really build on, I think, as a gap.
And stat stuff has come up as well. And it's also come up that there's, it's all the instruction sheets that walk a student carefully through, even really, really simple stuff like how to put things into Excel. Group 1, I think it was Group 1. I think Group 1 suggested that they possibly create a list of all the different ways you can do things and who's already got resources, and to share handouts and resources. So that idea of sharing some, so someone who's already got a handout for how to get students to use C2 to make a stratigraphic diagram, and even the really simple stuff. So I think that's definitely something that we'll pick up after the meeting and sort of email around everyone, because something which we originally suggested but hasn't really been picked up much was actually sharing handouts, because I suspect everybody has got that handout that goes back to time immemorial. Pollen analysts probably know what I mean when I say tree spreading in the British Isles. I taught that practical in almost the same form at 3 different universities with local materials, done it myself. It's been shared around a lot because it's a great practical. So there's maybe quite a lot of things there that we can think about. Helen has made a really good point about pedagogy as well, which is that keeping things really short runs the risk of pandering to students who already have a short attention span, and that needs to be accompanied by pushing them towards doing some longer form reading when they've downloaded material and are actually reading and thinking about it. And I agree with that. I think that's always a challenge. So I really think that if people are willing to sort of think about sharing teaching material, that would be, and handouts and so on, that would be well worth doing. Got a nice long list here from one of the working groups, that conscious of overlap and trying to make sure that groups are properly interworking so that people are attending the different meetings. And I agree with that completely. One of the issues, of course, has just been summer holidays. We're getting along a good material, but having ideas of which topics are going to be covered or covered is going to be very important. And thinking about, again, better communication from individuals working on things or the working groups with the wider group. So I see the mixture of bespoke mailings plus monthly newsletter, rather than having different email groups. And I can see a lot of point in that. I think that's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
Jane, to follow up on that, just the end of that point from that working group, from that breakout group, sorry, the idea as well of perhaps something that we haven't done quite so well is, I think we discussed this earlier in the smaller group, was communicating with that wider group who signed up for, I'm interested and I might be able to help, but I don't want to be heavily involved at this stage. So perhaps that monthly newsletter would help fill that gap of the kind of missing communication.
Yeah, it definitely would. I mean, I think that's something, and that's also something, if anyone thinks that's something they'd like to volunteer to do, or to volunteer that we can exploit our interns, since that is generally the role of interns, she says rudely, but we could get the interns to help set that up, but they're with us for 3 months, and then someone who might be willing to take that over come December. Where the role, that role of email, of saying to all the groups, what do you want to put in the newsletter, and of making sure it gets sent out. So I think that's always going to be important. Are there any other? So we've thought about accessibility. We've thought about a bit about teaching, and the work of working group 5 around suggesting pathways and collating material and handouts and so on that exist, that people have created, and different ways of using material, and particularly perhaps a subset around the statistical methods, which I think the data analysis journey, it's in there, but it's not being pulled out as particularly strong, I think, for various reasons. And that there's a lot of resources. It's also maybe worth noting that something that came up in our group was that there's a bit of a divide between universities that immerse students in R from day one, and therefore need a set of resources, and universities that don't immerse students in R, or that have some students from programs where they don't learn R, and therefore still need a range of other resources. Oh, and yeah, a good point from Elizabeth here that perhaps this is something to put down as an extra column, is whether resources can be used on Macs or not, if they'll only work on PCs, that sort of thing. But particularly the Mac versus PC divide is real in some of this, and col-pol is an example. I should say it was written locally, and we're a no Macs university, so you know, it just didn't. But I think that's a useful point. Someone else say something before I'm just talking into the void.
Jane, just to throw in one of the other aspects, I think we'll talk about it on tomorrow afternoon of sort of ways forward. One of the things that we talked about, and I think Simon mentioned with the sort of evolution of groups, is kind of the maintenance of the website and how we push forward with looking like a shiny group of people that are all working together. So you know that obviously it'll come up tomorrow with the second discussion, but as sort of possible gaps at the moment is getting that website up and ready would be really is a kind of priority, so that maybe the shift in focus of working group 1 or anything would be great.
Well, our decision was that collation, we couldn't do everything, and collation was more important.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And so is that that's the biggest reason why I put in for 2 interns, is that I'm hoping in the next 3 months, with the able help of Harry and Elizabeth, we'll be able to build out a great deal of the website so that it is as you say, a functional and valuable resource. Personally, I think there are still a lot of gaps, and I know there are a lot of resources we still haven't got. There's a lot of collation work still to do, because there's some fantastic material out there. And also, if staff's thinking about how, if pedagogy are collecting materials, how do they want to handle that? Whether they feel that they want to focus on creating material and on research projects, and that the collation of resources around statistics and so on comes back to working group 1. But these are really useful things to think about as we go forward. So it's just trying to, hopefully somebody will remember them in our collective brain of 20 odd people.
I will remember that, because I've got to start preparing material.
Well, yeah.
So, one thing I was going to say that came up in group 1 is we did talk quite a lot about the different tools that we were using, or that were being made available by different institutions. It would be useful at some point to get a sense from people how they found those different tools and which ones work better than others. Because I think, well, I know for myself, I will tend to fall back on the things I know best. And there may be lots of shiny tools out there which are fantastic, but they'll take time to learn. But they may be worth taking time, or they may not be. And I think it'd be really handy for me for somebody to say, well, I've used X, Y, Z, these work fantastically, don't bother with these.
I have 2 thoughts on that. One is that really fits in with what Helen Shaw was saying earlier about having a group in T1 who can feed forward what happened in, I think it was Helen Shaw, to 2 people who are using stuff in T2, and actually making a deliberate point of capturing the lessons learned in T1 and sharing them as widely as possible.
Yeah.
That might make an article for the quaternary newsletter or something like that would really share out. The second one, I think
There may also be some tools which are better suited for our discipline as well, because a lot of our institutional training is quite well, at Glasgow it seems to be very unfiltered, and everything is being thrown out there. And I'd much rather somebody said, for these disciplines we think X, Y, Z are useful.
The other thing I meant to say is that there's an issue of student overwhelm too.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, things like ThingLink, for example, is absolute beauty. But when I looked into it, unless you have quite a high level and quite an expensive university license. If you share material with more than one university, you very quickly run out of the limit of how many.
I know, yeah.
And that's very user friendly, whereas there are less user friendly things. But particularly, we've been, I think it comes back as well to this is emergency teaching, and we need to not overwhelm ourselves or our students with new technologies and gadgets. You know, if you're used to using Google, we stopped teaching Google Earth because we got so fed up with students thinking a screenshot from Google Earth was a map or was an adequate illustration for an essay that we actually no longer teach it. We only teach Digimap. So Google Earth-based resources might be a bit of a challenge for my group, but for other groups that use it regularly, they would really be familiar. And I think it's about trying not to get things in the way. But another point coming up about, again, about lists of what is available and what will be available in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks as people are putting together their teaching. And Simon asking again about consensus on new working groups. I really think it makes sense to leave that till the end of day 2, Simon, because more is going to come out over the next tomorrow, I hope, as we've got more chance to talk about each of the working groups areas and what they think. But yeah, some comments about what advertising. Hi, Martin.
Hiya. No, I was just wondering whether, I mean, because I'm not sure if everybody who is here now will be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
Whether it makes sense to have a slight, let's say, pre-discussion of the working groups for tomorrow. But I don't know if there's time for that really. But
there's time. I mean, we scheduled ourselves until 4, so we've got time until. I thought, do people feel that? My feeling is that how it's organised is less important than what it's actually doing.
Yeah.
And has everybody said what they need to say about what it's doing? And then if yes, then yes. Let's talk about where.
So the reason for saying that, sorry, is that there was quite a bit of time spent on this in the breakout room. So I'm just a bit conscious that some of that might then disappear again.
Yeah.
And I think so, especially so Steve, who isn't here now, he said like, well, let's just be really careful that we're not like having too much overlap, basically, again, well, which is you know, that is how it, you know, the nature of how this was, how we did it, of course, and also, I mean, partly, I guess, my mistake for including the bit of the field sampling into the sample journey in working group 3. But I think it's really, so for me, the main thing I want to say is I think what's really useful is now we have the collation and we have to, you know, that needs to be tweaked, etc. But that's more or less there. But I think it's really crucial to come up, and maybe the working groups as they are now are best placed to do that. But to come up with a list of kind of desirables and kind of a prioritized list of desirables. But I
have a couple of cards on that. One is that I think at the beginning that it was really, we were doing a really good job of deciding who did what through the coordinating group, but because so many people have been on holiday in August, I mean, how dare we? It's not as if August is holiday month, but that has meant that certainly in terms of the talks, there wasn't very good communication between groups at all about who talked about which aspect, and it's definitely, we can improve a lot on our various bits of group working. And I say it's people being available, and it's important to prioritize, and that was the remit of the various groups. And it was also, I think it's down to the group leads though to shape what, essentially, because it's very much, at the moment, it's unfunded, it's a community project. So what we really, if people are keen to do things, we want to help them do it and help them do it in a way that doesn't overlap. And that's, and I've always envisaged that more as we don't want 3 people going and filming coring in a bog and nobody filming anything else, than making sure that the different groups don't work. But what other bits and pieces? What Sorry?
Oh, sorry, no, that's...
Nikki said it was important to prioritise, and I agree with that. We have tried to send messages to the whole group, although we've probably messed that up, asking for people's priorities, and we're not really getting a clear steer. Surprisingly enough, everyone prioritises their own things. Michelle has added a comment that in working group 2, they've collated materials that exist and called for more suggestions. And yeah, it would definitely, those lists should have been sent to working group 1 and copied into the working group 1 master list. And as far as I know, the sample journey one was the one Michelle's talking about. No, sample journey has, but working group 2's hasn't. We haven't had that yet, so it hasn't fed into the master one, which is the one that we're checking and then building the website from. So yeah, there's definitely a workflow thing there, because those and definitely.
No, that's absolutely. So that's also because I'd like to see where I can be most, what I can do most efficient, you know, how I can spend my time most efficiently. And I would like to make I'm planning to make some videos, and I know there's some other people's as well, but I just want to make sure that I'm not making videos of things that we've by now actually already found. And I think so for me, and I know there's some other people who are preparing materials for teaching. I think this is really a crucial thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I really think that a priority of the next 2 weeks has got to be to get a list of who's doing what.
Yeah.
In the next few weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, we hoped, entirely, this is holidays and things, but it was something that we hoped the 3 groups would take their sections of the master list and basically look at those in the various sections. And that's, again, probably a communication thing, but in theory, all the group leading a working group have access to the master list. And that actually maybe we should set up a second spreadsheet of who's planning to do things.
Yeah, or a column.
Or actually, even better, a separate ply in the master list.
Something, yeah. No, that's good. What I'll actually do that. I'll have a look. So yeah, it's partly to do with holiday as well, but yeah, to kind of align, to double check, let's say the working groups 3 spreadsheet and working group 1 spreadsheet, to make sure that they've been fully synchronized.
Make sure that everything's moved up, yes. And also to Liz, who can't be with us today because she's got holiday things and in-laws and family things, has already begun to pull a list from working group 1 of what look like obvious gaps, with the hopes of encouraging people to sign up against them. And I say she did send around an email, but we got very little response. So that's, I think, I hope that a key outcome of this is going to be that we put together a newsletter in which all these requests go once a month, get it out to everyone. And Carney says she thinks that working groups 2 and 3 are already pretty synchronized. And Jill says the gap identification will be easier when everyone's seen the master file. And yes, Jill, we need a process. So that's definitely something to go onto the list of. So we'll attempt to meet everybody who's active. We want. I think it's something we'll think about exactly how we're going to do it in workshop 4 tomorrow, about how we organise it going forward. But we will definitely add it to the list of things. I say I'd really like to know what other people are doing, so I know what I can skip doing. Having spent quite a lot of time trying to sort out SCP photographs and practicals recently.
No, but that's great. I'll have a look at that spreadsheet again as well. The current working group 1 collation, is that still on a
the live it's called master? It's just changed its name to master list because it was called something. Yeah, it's currently called master list, and yeah, the every working group was given view access, and one person on each working group was given edit access.
Okay.
We didn't want loads of people editing it because we were concerned about version control and people trying to tidy it up.
Oh, obviously. Okay, I'll check. Well, I'll check whether it was me.
We'll
who
email
got
that out
but
again.
okay, brilliant. Yeah.
That master list journey is the one that Ahmed, one of the interns, has been working his way through.
No, Ahmed's been working on a pull down from the master list. So we did a pull of the master list and handed that over to Ahmed. And then they get reconciled, because otherwise, again,
okay,
we don't want, we've all done the thing where you accidentally delete a column or stuff.
sure.
So it's kind of a raw master list, and then we always work on a version.
That initial copy is now worked through and checked 250 of the links. So it's,
yes, I know. We said earlier, yeah. So he's done everything up to, I think, how many did you say, Kim? 280?
Yeah, so Ahmed's checked up to about 250, and then we had an extra 40 or so on top after that. So there's a few more to check through. And
there'll be another batch. Yeah, I think what we've been trying to do is kind of batch. So not just send him, here's one, but to say, here's a chunk, do these, then do something else. And I think it sounds like there will be some materials, maybe some materials from 2 and 3. What Michelle was saying, that sharing those lists and doing the cross check with working group 1 with that master list.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll do that for working group 3. So.
Okay. Cross check 2 and 3 verse master and copy control. So I'm trying to make sure that I write things down in a really, really obvious way. My notes tend to get a bit exciting. So what I've got on there is this cross-checking thing, that there's a key element of what's coming. So who now people are actually creating stuff, what is being created, and roughly its delivery, and for when, because if somebody's doing something brilliant that's going to come out in trimester 2, it's worth doing a fudge for this trimester and maybe even sharing that fudge. So I've been creating an SCP practical, and that maybe it's not good, but it's what I can do. Nikki says, will there be a chance tomorrow to try and produce a list of items that people have identified that we don't have? Absolutely. And there's a space for that on the feedback form as well, to encourage people to let us know if there are materials that are missing.
And Jane, sorry, just to chime in. No, just I guess we have, as I was saying, we have the proxy gaps, which I think will be quite easy to fill once everyone's seen, as Jill said, once everyone's seen the master spreadsheet. I think that will be quite good to sort of show up. But I think it's the gaps in wider aspects of the IP that'll be really good to get feedback on as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to sort by each drop down in turn and look at the patterns. It's just been having somebody, you know, it does take a proportion of time, and it's having the time to do that. Another question about access to the working group 1. As I said, at the moment, the people who actively were coordinating the working group, so the small groups who are leading each working group, should all be able to see that spreadsheet, and one person from each of those should have write access so that they can put stuff in it. And I suspect, though, that between the very democratic way that working groups have been working, so there's been a great deal, it's been the most fantastic community project and very collaborative, but I suspect this idea of one person who edits things has actually been a bit of a victim of that, and that this is definitely something we need to think about. Yeah, working group 2 were a bit lost. Yes, I'm not surprised. I think every working group at some point has had that conversation. And I say it's been people being on leave, different mixtures of people reporting in, coming to the main group, not coming to the group. So that's something we need to do better at. But actually, one idea in terms of gaps is potentially in feedback on tool use rather than, or in addition to, yes. I think that if anyone from the coordinating group can stay straight after this. I wonder if what we could do is we could very quickly create a Google spreadsheet that we could share with people tomorrow that they could dump things in. So we're already starting to organize it. And Kim, who else is here from Working Group 1? Is it just you and me who's here?
Jill's here as well.
Jill, of course. We should have a look at, actually, you know, Jill, you're the perfect person to ask whether we could do a pull of the master sheet as it is now, which isn't the one we wanted to release on Friday, which would be carefully cross-checked against Ahmed's. But we could actually save a copy and share it with people tomorrow so that they can actually be having a play with it.
Well, we already have the blank template file.
We do.
People can put information, so would that do the job?
Actually, yeah, that would do the job for collecting things. Actually, what about the one Ahmed's worked on and organised, Simon, that we could maybe share that one with everyone, because we know it's missing 30 or 40 resources, but we also know that it's been tidied up and checked, and we could share that now to give people a little bit more information about what's missing and so on. That would really help working groups 2 and 3, I think, to check whether so I should say that a bit of workflow, we collated stuff. Working Group 1 collated stuff. They then shared that collation with 2 and 3, who pulled out the bits that were most relevant to them and then started filling it in. And this was all in June, but it feels like it was in January 2019 sort of thing. So it's just a case of putting them back. There will be a lot of overlap. Does that make sense, or have I just talked myself in a circle?
I think that makes sense. Yeah, the spreadsheet I can share. Yeah, I can. The last iteration that Ahmed did. Yeah,
because we know that one's quality checked, so if that's the best one to share. Great.
Okay, I'll do that now. I'll find it and do that.
Brilliant. I can see some thumbs up. So we can share that before tomorrow, and then people can actually have a look and think about it while we're all engaged in it now. Brilliant. Right, I think we've now mentioned everything on that. Is there anything else that didn't come up? Anything else that hasn't yet been mentioned?
Don't think so.
Great. In that case, I think, although we've still got 10 minutes of general chat time, I suggest that we all use them to make a cup of tea and just say thank you very much, everyone, for coming today, for contributing, and you know, we'll hopefully see you tomorrow with loads of ideas. So, yeah. Great, bye. And so if anyone if the core group can stay, that would be brilliant.
Thanks a lot, Jane, for organising. Brilliant.
Thank you.